In the great congregation, let us bless the Holy One. With songs of thanksgiving, we retell God's wondrous deeds. We love the house in which God dwells,
and the place where God's glory shines forth.
Proclaim God's name to all the world.
In the midst of the congregation, we praise God's holy name.
Now let's sing a hymn for Mother's Day. Here it's number 453, Happy Our Home When God is There. Looking to the Bible and Scripture this morning, as I said, we turn to the book of Job. And we will begin with chapter 1, where first we will read the first 12 verses. So hear the word of the Lord. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. Now there was a day when when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now I have a really awesome worship song to share with you here. It's called "Where Were You?" And it's concerning the book of Job here. Basically, it starts out with someone like me or you asking God, "What's all this that I see in the world? What's all this woe and misery and sadness? What are you doing?" You know? And then, as we'll read in the book of Job, God answers him. So,
I said, "God, I do not understand this world. Everything is dying and broken. Why do I see nothing but suffering?" God, I'm asking, could this be your plan? Sin has taken hold of this whole land. Will you not say anything else to me? He said, "Where were you the day that I measured? Sunk the base and stretched the line over all the earth and carved out its cornerstone?
Amen? That's the whole point. He kneels and answers us. He is mindful of us in spite of all that he is and has done. Turning again to the Bible and Scripture, book of Job, we'll pick up with verse 13 till the end of the first chapter. Hear the word of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, God did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. This is the word of the Lord for the people of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'm excited. Today, we begin a journey together into and through the book of Job, which many consider to be one of the most fascinating books of the Bible. And I will say I'm right there with that. The book of Job is a masterpiece of literature that has intrigued readers for many generations. And its ancient insights are remarkably modern, and its message is needed more today than ever before. Its long discourses, though sometimes difficult to follow and seemingly redundant, sparkle with beautiful poetry and vibrate with deep emotion, contributing to the fascination that grips thoughtful and critical readers alike. And its insights penetrate human nature. They offer foresights into modern science and probe the very heart of God. The passages where God answers Job, like we heard a little bit of in that psalm, and he answers his friends, are among the best in the Bible. I've always marveled at them even before I really could begin to understand any of it. Studying, speaking, and teaching about Job can be very challenging, no doubt, because many commentaries, both liberal and conservative, have been written about the book of Job, But few writers allow the book to speak for itself. Consequently, many expositors and scholars read interpretations into it rather than derive interpretations from it. And as Dr. Henry Morris said, Job's God-centered message has often been bypassed by writers and preachers seeking answers to man-centered problems, and understandably so. But it is important to keep in view the heavenly perspective with which it begins and ends. Otherwise, we may become entangled in too many humanistic philosophies that God himself eventually rebukes and repudiates. And yet, the book of Job touches the deepest parts of our humanity, which we cannot help delving into. But it also gives some of the clearest insights about God that we have, his thoughts and his ways. So I'll try to merge the two aspects of this fascinating book whenever I'm able to, as we go through the life of Job, seen through his eyes and through God's heavenly perspective. So I intend to go through the whole thing, and I'm not exactly sure how long that's going to take or how it's going to all fall together. We'll see as we go. And as we read through the Bible, coming up to Job, Job enters us into a new section of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is divided into different sections when you look at it. The first 5 books comprise what is often called the Pentateuch, the books of the law, or the Torah. And then the next several books are historic, as they deal with the history of the nation of Israel from the time that they come out of Egypt and begin as a nation in the land. And it covers that period of history while they are in the land of Israel, all the way through the Babylonian captivity and throughout the repatriation and regathering again to Israel. And those books of history take us all the way up to 400 BC. But then we enter into a third part of the Old Testament, the books that are known as the books of poetry. And these include Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. They are Hebrew poetry. And Hebrew poetry is fascinating. It's unlike our English poetry in that Hebrew poetry does not rhyme words, but actually gives sort of parallel thoughts or contrasting thoughts. And their sense of literature and poetry is not found in the rhyming of a word or not in a meter, but in the thoughts themselves. And so the paralleling thoughts are the rhyming thoughts. The words don't necessarily rhyme, but there is a rhyme or parallelism within the thoughts or a contrast. The way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. For the righteous shall flourish, but the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous, the wicked. And so you have contrast between the thoughts. Or you have the parallel thoughts where they are building. The way of the Lord is right. The way of the Lord is true. The way of the Lord is just. And so you're giving parallel thought concepts. So Job is the first of the books of poetry. It's been considered the oldest book of the Bible, perhaps older even than the book of Genesis. Though Genesis, of course, deals with some history that predates Job. Even though there is a Jobab mentioned in Genesis that is very possibly the Job of this book, who lived at the same time as Abraham. So it is possible that Job dates back as far as does Abraham, just a couple of generations away from Noah and the flood. Thus, in the book of Job, which is one of the oldest books of man's literature, we hear the expression of the thoughts of some of the earliest men. And we find that men from the beginning have been pretty much the same. Even though our cultures have changed and times have changed since the time of Job, we find that basically the same things that were a problem to Job are the same things that become a problem to us. The same needs that Job expressed are the same needs that still exist in man today. And in Job, we have the picture of a man who was reduced, perhaps more than any other man has ever been reduced, to just the bare essentials of existence. With Job, it becomes just raw existence. And everything that we think is necessary for life, everything that we consider to be important for our lives, was stripped away from Job. His possessions, his family and friends, his health. He lost practically everything. He even lost the consciousness of the sense of his own worth as he began to curse the day that he was born and cry out for death. Now, when you've lost everything, that is when your deepest longings and feelings are exposed. See, then you're not worried about where will we go to eat after church today? Or what are we going to do tomorrow on the holiday? See, those things don't become major issues, points of argument or debate when you have nothing left. You see, we crowd and fill our minds with lots of things that really aren't essential to life because we have friends and many interests, and these things can become very important to us. Unfortunately, people can spend their whole lives in things that don't really matter. A whole life can be wasted in non-essentials. We don't worry about can we eat or not. Is there any food for us to eat today? Our argument is, what is the choice that we're going to eat? I have a taste for Mexican food. Well, I have a choice for Italian food. I want lasagna. Well, I want the chips and salsa. And you call the attorney and get a divorce over trivial things. The book of Job helps us to see how man can spend his life majoring in minors and never come to the real issues of life. No, with Job, it became just existence. Everything was stripped away down to just the raw person. And what are the things that are expressed? What are the cries? What are the needs? Well, they are the basic needs of man and the basic needs of life that are expressed at this point. And then Job becomes a very interesting book to us as we listen to the cries of Job, as they deal with the deepest issues of life. So the story of Job is an interesting one, and it is one that surely does confirm what God has declared in Isaiah, and Job expressed himself, and that is the ways of God are beyond our finding out. You know, God said through Isaiah the prophet, "My ways are not your ways, saith the Lord, My ways are beyond your finding out, basically. I do not pretend to understanding everything about God. That's why I worship him. If I could understand God completely, then he would be on my level, and what would I have to worship? But because he's so much greater, wiser in wisdom and understanding and knowledge than I am, I stand in awe and reverence, and I worship him. Now, he doesn't always do things my way, nor does he always stop to explain to me why he did it his way, even though I sometimes demand that he does. And he doesn't always even pay attention to my demands. He just seems to go ahead and do what he wants to anyway, in spite of my objections. But I appreciate that, because I have found a long time ago that I don't know very much. I fit in the category of which Shakespeare wrote when he said, "Man, poor man, so ignorant in which he knows best." That applies. And I find I'm so ignorant in the things I know best. And so I'm glad to submit my life and my will to God and to his wisdom. And I'm thankful that I can pray, "Lord, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't like what you're doing, but I know that what you're doing is best, so just keep on doing it. Not my will, your will, Lord, be done." Now, the beginning of Job tells us a little background about him. Job lived in the land of Uz, it says. Well, Uz is mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, and most scholars think it was a section of Arabia, slightly south and east of Israel. Edom, the land of Esau, has also been identified with Uz, and it was sort of off in that direction. Now, concerning Job, it says that he was a perfect man. And the King James Version actually uses that word. Perfect and upright, and one that feared God, or reverenced God, and hated evil. And that statement was twice confirmed by God himself. So Job was the world's most righteous and godly man since Noah, and before Daniel. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, plus 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East, it says. A good man, a wealthy man, a man who loved God and hated evil. His sons, however, sound as though they were not cut from the same cloth. They seem to be partiers. That's the only thing they say about it, as they were eating and feasting and drinking. And in concern for his sons, Job would offer sacrifices for them and say, "Lord, forgive them if in their partying they say something that is contrary or against thee. Lord, grant them forgiveness." And he was constantly praying for his children. So we get a little background about the man at the beginning here. Next, though, in the account, we turn from this man and we're ushered into the heavenly scenes. All of a sudden. And here we are now at the throne of God. And the angels are coming and presenting themselves to God. And along with the angels, here comes Satan. Now, even after Satan's fall, it seems that he had access, and thus has access to the throne of God. Why does God access there, we wonder. I told you I don't know everything about God, and I don't know. It's a question in my mind. But Satan comes in to present himself before God, and God says, "Oh, where have you been?" He says, "I've been cruising around the world, going to and fro throughout it, walking up and down." God says, "Oh?" Now the Bible says that Satan is the accuser of the brethren, and he accuses them before God day and night. Now we find him in that position right here. And after God brings up the subject of Job, Satan begins to accuse him. "Have you considered my servant Job?" God asks. And he's doing a little bragging now. He's got one down there who really loves him, and he's a perfect man. He hates evil, praying for his children. "Have you considered my servant Job?" Now the word "considered" here is really interesting, and it helped me understand this a little bit. I always wondered, why on earth did God bring him up out of the blue and cause all this grief and problems on him? Well, it really wasn't the case. See, the word "considered" here is interesting because actually it's a military term in the Hebrew. It's the term used of a general who studies a city before he attacks it, to develop a strategy of how he's going to go about destroying the city. So he's watching when they open the gates and the method of which they open the gates. How do the people come out? What gates are most easily attacked? And he's developing his whole strategy in order that he might attack and destroy the city. That's the Hebrew background of the word that God asks. "Have you been studying Job?" He asks, "seeking to develop a strategy whereby you might destroy him? Have you considered my servant Job?" He knows he has. Now, frighteningly, Satan declares, "Yes, I've seen that fellow. I've studied him." And not only had Satan been studying Job, but he had developed a whole philosophy concerning Job. He said, "Job has been blessed of you. Look, he's the wealthiest man in the East. He has everything anybody could ever desire or want. Job is just serving you because you blessed him so much. Who wouldn't serve you if you blessed him like that? And you put a hedge around him, and I can't get to him." Well, this is interesting, this hedge that God puts around his children. It says elsewhere, "He shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways, to bear thee up, lest at any time you dash your foot against a stone." From Psalm 91. See, Satan is complaining about that hedge. "Let me get at it. Let me get at him. Let me take away his wealth, and he's going to curse you to your face," Satan says. "Job only serves you because it pays such big dividends." So God says to Satan, "All right, I'll let you at him. Only don't touch him. You can touch his possessions. Don't touch him." And it says, "So it came to pass in a certain day, while his children were feasting and drinking in his oldest son's house, there came a messenger to Job." And we read through it, all the terrible things that happened, and all his friends and possessions, even his children, were destroyed by Satan. Wipe out, in a moment's time, your wealth, your possessions, and even all of your children are taken away. What do? Job fell on his face there in the dirt, and he blessed God. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked I'm going to return. The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all of these things, Job did not curse God. Neither did he charge God foolishly. Wow. Would we do that? Now, I feel the need to say that I've heard many people charge God foolishly. I've done so myself. Maybe they didn't curse God, but they've made foolish charges against God. I've heard people say, I don't think God cares about me at all. I don't think God loves me. Those are foolish charges against God. Sometimes, because of our circumstances, we are prone to make foolish charges against God. But Job didn't do that. He passed test 1. Will you? Will we? Blessed be the name of the Lord. Amen? Amen. We'll leave it there for now, and next week we'll move on to chapter 2. I'll give you some homework. Go ahead and read it. Read chapter 2 of Job. Read the whole thing, and then come back and look at Job. I'll ask you to read ahead every week. Amen? All right. Well, blessed be the name of the Lord. Let's sing that hymn. Number 52. Would you please stand?
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
and go to be with them today. Thank God for how good they've been to you, all the wonderful things they did. And remember, it's nothing compared to how much He loves you. In Jesus' name, amen. Praise God. How much more